Greetings and welcome to Growth Hacking Secrets. I'm your host, Muhammad Siddique from Atlanta, Georgia, and the co author of New Success Secrets available on Amazon. On this episode, we have a special guest, Laura Cathcart Robbins. Laura is the host of the Only One in the Room podcast. Please join me to give a warm welcome to our guest, Laura Cathcart Robbins from Los Angeles. Laura, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure, and let me congratulate you on your so many episodes with so many wonderful guests.
Yes,
You
yes, thank you.
on your podcast, you're doing an amazing work. Let me tell you that part.
I
So,
appreciate it.
yeah, Laura, let me start with this. Where were you? What happened? Who you were surrounded with that inspired you to get started with the Only One in the Room podcast?
Well, the podcast came out of an experience I had. I went to a writers' retreat, a really famous writers' retreat. There were 600 people there, and I was the only Black person there. And when I left the 3-day retreat, I went home and I wrote about my experience for HuffPo or the Huffington Post. And the article went viral in seconds. It was the craziest thing that has ever happened to me. And almost instantly, as soon as it went live, I started getting responses from people all around the world who connected with the feeling of being other, not necessarily being a Black woman in a room full of white people, but maybe I'm the only divorced person, or I'm the only person, who had a different kind of lunch than my friends in school, or I'm the only one, who's here at this school on scholarship, or I'm the only one taking care of an aging parent, or whatever it is that felt isolating to them. They connected. And a lot of the responses I got were hashtagged the only one in the room. I happened to be taking a podcasting class at the time. This was in 2018. And I decided to create a podcast in that class out of that hashtag, the only one in the room, and tell the stories that were being sent to me. So that's how it happened.
Oh my God, you have a very unique. This is
Yes.
whole story how it came up with. Really, you don't really dictate yourself. You like what the universe gave it to you, basically.
Yes. It's well, and I'm a writer.
Yeah.
And so part of, and I love what you're doing here is, giving people these 15-minute bites of how to grow and succeed. The information given to me, the advice given to me as a writer was to create an author's platform, which means that when you Google me, you want to see that I'm doing lots of different things. And podcasting was suggested to me as part of that platform. So that's why I was taking the class. I intended to start one. I just didn't know what it was going to be about. And then these two things happened together where the only one in the room story met the only one in the room idea. And so the podcast was born.
Yeah, it's a great name and great idea.
Thank you.
So, based on your experience with the Only One in the Room podcast as a host, so what are the top three missteps to avoid when you're getting into launching a business or launching a podcast host or whatever? So based on your experience,
The top three, I'm sorry, the top three what?
missteps to
Steps.
avoid.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, those are good questions because there definitely were a lot. I think the first great thing that I did was to align myself with a team of people who had more experience than I do or did at that time. That was really, really helpful. I would have invested time in engaging in the podcast community more before I launched my podcast, because I would have understood more about, what we did was called a deadlift. I had no audience, no listeners, nobody that was checking for me. So I'm putting out a podcast really into the ether. And had I been more engaged with those people in the podcasting community, I would have had a network of people that could have helped me promote it from the beginning. So that's one misstep. The other was really, just not having a formula to make sure that I got the guests that I wanted. And I would have, again, if I had engaged in that community, talked to people about the steps toward getting guests that have followers, that have name recognition, that could help me elevate my podcast from the beginning. I learned to do that, but that was something that I would have, if I had done more research, I could have done that earlier. And, the third wasn't really a misstep. We recorded all of our interviews in person for the first year and a half. And then we pivoted during COVID, and my boyfriend, producer, and co-host, Scott Slaughter, he turned his office into a podcast studio. That has saved a tremendous amount of money. And we could have been investing that money somewhere else if we had done that in the beginning.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Still, if you would have been a part of a network with the other podcast hosts, you would have been probably, we can't go back. We can only learn from our past. So
exactly.
Right from day one, hey, how are you doing the podcast? If you ask 10, 20 of them, you say, oh, yeah, that's the way to go,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful, Laura. I appreciate. So I'm sure those are the missteps and mistakes to avoid. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing with us authentically,
Of course.
And what are your top 3 success secrets of being a successful podcast host?
So the first one, going back to one of my missteps, was my formula now for getting great guests. And, I really took the mindset once I understood that everybody wants to tell their story. Mm-hmm. Everybody does. It's just a matter of getting them to that point where they want to tell it on your show. Yeah. But because everybody wants to tell their story, there's a way for me to get any guest that I want. Yeah. And so what the kind of mantra that I developed was, I don't stop until I get that yes. And that doesn't mean that I'm pestering them and making myself a nuisance. That means that I am coming at them from different angles. I'm going to publicists, I'm going to agencies, I'm going to agents directly. I'm finding them on Instagram. I'm DMing them. I'm showing up in their comments. I am around. I'm emailing if I have a way to email them. Certainly if I have a phone number, I'm texting or calling. And, if they say not now, that's fine. I will put a pin in it and come back, but I'm not going to stop until I get them to say yes and come on the show. So that has been really, people are always asking us, how do you get such great guests for the only one in the room? Part of it is relationships for sure. But the other part is that I just don't give up until I get the guest. In the nicest way, what they call it, pleasantly relentless. That was, I am pleasantly relentless with that. Yeah. Let's see. The other pieces of it is I mentioned Scott Slaughter, he's boyfriend, producer, co-host. He has really put together an amazing website. And we just rebranded our website. It's about to come out. Having a partner that has a different skill set than me, I'm the creative, but having a partner that can handle marketing, the overseeing social media, the website, like I mentioned, merchandise. That is, first of all, it wouldn't be here. The podcast wouldn't exist without him. Mm-hmm. And then my role in it would be so much more taxing if I had to do the research, get the guests. It's so much, doing research on potential guests is enormous. I want to be really respectful to them when they come on. I don't want to waste their time. So it really takes up most of my week doing the research and then doing these interviews, plus my writing, which is, what this is all for. So having a partner with those skill sets who's willing to do that has been invaluable to me. So that's another secret to the success of the podcast. And, the third, I think, is really just that we don't do business profiles on our podcast. If you've made $1 million or $10 million or $1 billion doing something, that's amazing. But that's not the story you're going to tell on The Only One in the Room. You're going to tell the very vulnerable story of what inspired you to get there. You're going to talk to me about growing up poor or growing up with parents that weren't good for money and the impact that had on you. So people come to us for a different type of story. It's more of a personal essay than a profile. And what that sets us apart from a lot of podcasts.
Wonderful. And are they mentally ready to share their being vulnerable and almost in the whole throughout the uh, episode?
Are they vulnerable the whole episode?
Yeah,
Or
because like for mentally they have to switch to being a
yes.
vulnerable. Share it, be an open book.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and that's why I always do a pre-interview to make sure that this is something that we can do, because it's not the right fit for everybody. Not everybody's willing or wanting to come on and be vulnerable.
Mhm.
And so I do a pre-interview, make sure we're on the same page, make sure the story is there that I want them to tell and that they're willing to tell it. And then we do the interview.
Yeah, no, this is good, very good. So,
Yeah.
and the level of impact has the podcast by now so far. You like to share anything?
Well, I can just say that according to Listen Notes, which is a metric that tracks the growth of podcasts and downloads, we're in the top 1.5% of 183,000 podcasts. Is it 1,000 or a million, hun?
It's a million.
183 million podcasts.
1,830,000.
We're 1,830,000. Sorry.
So we have a invisible co-guest here.
We do have an invisible co-guest. Yes. He is on the other side of my screen I'm terrible with numbers. This is why I need him. That's why he's the secret to my success. But so 1 million, can you give me the number again, hon?
1,800,000.
So we are the top 0.5% of those podcasts. For a podcast that launched less than 2 years ago, that's incredible.
Yeah. Congrats to you and our invisible co-guest.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm sure it was never like that. Now you got to the top, just like made a 10 million or X, whatever. That's not the story. The story is in the struggle. So
Yes.
I want you to share one thing with us. And here's the question: what was your most professional failure in this whole journey, and what did you learn from it, and how did you recover from it?
Let's see. Well, I think that I don't know if it could be classified strictly as a failure, but really, truly, the most frustrating thing, the most defeating thing for me so far has been trying to curate organic growth. And that is just really hard. It's, everything's together, right? I have the guests, I have the content, I have the story, we have the site, we have the website, and we're putting this podcast out into the ether and people aren't listening. Mm-hmm. And so then, I do what's suggested. I get people to share it. I, try to build social media. We do all these things and people still aren't listening. And so it feels like abject failure every time we get our numbers and they're the same or lower. That's the really hard part. What has happened since then, of course, we've gotten those listeners, but we also engaged advertising. We started advertising on different platforms. So instead of trying to curate organic growth, we're able to triple, quadruple, in the speediest of time, our numbers with some really strategic, well-placed, not entirely expensive either, advertising, because that brought in that market, because when we're asking people to share, maybe the person they're sharing with isn't a podcast listener.
Yeah.
So advertising in those particular places to podcast listeners specifically brought us in the listeners that we needed. So like I said, a few strategic ad campaigns was what we learned to do, because the trying to grow it organically was literally the most frustrating, defeating thing about this having a podcast.
Mm. Thank you, Laura. See, you gave us the golden nugget on this one. So thank you so much, because that's a really great lesson and tip for many, many other podcast hosts, because they're doing so much hard work and they're not getting what they wanted to get,
Yes.
Yeah. So how the growth hacking secrets community, people who are watching this right now, how can support you?
Well, How can you support me? Is definitely by subscribing to the Only One in the Room podcast, wherever you get podcasts. We're on every platform conceivable, just so that we are accessible to everybody. So the Only One in the Room podcast, if you subscribe, and then that's great when you subscribe, but we drop an episode on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. So please download those episodes. Those are the numbers we actually need. We need you to download and listen to those episodes. We're putting out amazing content, incredible stories you will want to share, stories you haven't heard before. So if you subscribe to the Only One in the Room podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and then download the episodes and then share them, when you hear something that someone else in your world needs to hear, and you will hear that episode. So that could be how you could support us.
Wonderful. So you can also go to theonlyonepod.com.
That's right.
TheOnlyOnepod.com. So thank you so much. How are you monetizing? I'm just asking a follow-up question how you are monetizing the podcast, this whole effort thing, right now.
Yeah, that's a good question. And a lot of people have that question because it's not obvious how you would make money from someone listening to something. But the answer is really the same as it is with mass media, which is podcasting is not mass media yet. It's only 11% of all consumers consume their information through podcasts. But the answer is still the same. We advertise. People advertise on our platform. And the other way that a lot of people monetize, which is something that we are beginning to do, is to, for instance, because I'm a writer, start doing writing coaching and that type of thing as a part of this platform. Speaking engagements, which I'm also doing, and bringing in more people to those, those writing conferences and that type of thing. And coaching is really, coaching is huge for podcasters. A lot of podcasters make, 6 figures and up and fully monetize their podcast just by coaching. But if you have enough downloads, people will advertise on your podcast and you can monetize it that way.
Understood. I appreciate you very much. I like to ask this question to every guest. We are about to wrap up as a kind of review and testimonial for the show. And here's the question I ask. What would you say to your best friend about a Growth Hacking Secret show when I'm not there?
Well, for sure, I would say you've got to watch this show because it's a morning bite of these secrets that you're not going to hear anywhere else. Everyone needs a hack. If I had all these hacks when I started my podcast, I'd be much further along right now. And this is where you're going to find them. Growth Hacking Secrets. Meet Siddique.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words. And Laura, what would you say as a final word?
The final word is, podcasts are amazing ways to get your information. It's like sitting around the radio during the 1940s and 50s and hearing these stories. It takes you away from a screen. And we all need that, especially right now. Yeah. So if you're not a podcast listener, check them out. But start with mine, the only one in the room.
That's a good one. And my last word is check the theonlyonepod.com. Theonlyonepod.com. Thank you so much, Laura Robbins, for sharing your wisdom with us today on the behalf of our Growth Hacking Secrets community and our entire team. We really appreciate you. This is Muhammad Siddique signing off from Atlanta, Georgia. Until the next episode, all good wishes.